Thank you, everyone, for joining today. When we talk about HR analytics, we often are focused on the data itself. And today, what I'd like to talk about is what factors really underlie success when you are going down that path of building a talent analytics strategy. When we think about HR from a strategic perspective, HR has certainly come a long way in the last several years and become more strategic to the business and have that proverbial seat at the table. But this quote is actually from a few years ago and speaks about how we use analytics to not only have that seat at the table, but owning the table. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we as an HR profession have really talked about how we can embrace talent analytics more and incorporate it into the decisions and investments that we make within our organizations for our workforce. And that is really become an imperative because that's what's happening in the rest of our organization. So analytics, data analytics in general, truly matters to our C-suite because data analytics has become a part of many areas of the business. So think of even as a consumer, how information is gathered about your buying decisions or your response to brands and marketing. Analytics comes into play when companies are trying to improve efficiencies in their operations from a logistics perspective, financial modeling, and so forth. And now that C-suite is saying, where are these analytics when it comes to decisions about talent? And talent strategies are top of mind for those executives as well. So it only makes sense that the movement of more advanced analytics has gone from the various areas of the company and now is being expected from HR, talent management as well. Yet our ability from an HR profession has not really progressed as quickly as we would have expected. In this particular report by Deloitte, this was HR leaders reporting about themselves, and they said, we just don't feel like our capabilities around analytics are very strong, and yet only 35% say their analytics are under active development. So I thought this was particularly compelling because if there's an opportunity for improvement, why is it that there's such a small number of people, number of respondents who said that they're actively working on it? This is not the only survey where we've seen that. And again, I know that there are, many analytics experts out there we continue to say the same thing is, why are we not making as much progress as we thought? And again, CEOs and the C-suite have that same type of perception. So HR is good at many things in many areas, but talent analytics tends to fall to the bottom of the list. And yet the expectation is there, that expectation from not only the CHRO, but throughout the organization. So CHROs are expected to be able to speak the language of the business, to deliver results that are related to costs and risks and improvements, to forecast the needs, the skills and capabilities for the organization that are needed for the future, and to use data to make workforce decisions. And yet there is a gap there in, again, what CHROs are doing versus what they're expected to do. If you even Google today or go out to one of the recruiting sites and look at a job description for an HR business partner, I think you'll also find that it's become more and more common that the use of analytics and the use of data to drive talent within an organization is an expectation that we have throughout the team, not just at the top. So what is holding HR back? Again, I'm sure there's many opinions about this, but there are some really fundamental barriers that when I talk to folks at different companies, they say, I just don't have the data, or I don't have integrated data, or there are problems with my data. Perhaps when they feel like they're starting to address the data issues, they still don't feel like they have the right tools or technology. They're looking to make investments in those areas, but they're just not there yet. Or they feel like they need to embed analytics capabilities into their team, or at least have access to people with more sophisticated analytics knowledge and expertise, and they're still in the process of doing that. These are all very real barriers, and I don't want to minimize them at all. For today, though, I actually like us to assume that you have all of these. So imagine for a minute, and many of you may have overcome these barriers and others may not, but for the purpose of today, I'd like you to assume that your data is accessible, it's clean, you've got all the tools and technology, you're starting to run analysis, and you have access to resources who can help you do that. So you might be asking, all right, well then I'd be, hitting the ground running. So what is left? But this is where I really feel like we're having trouble making progress. The progression barriers, I often hear people say, I'm not sure what problem I'm supposed to be solving or what question we're addressing. Once I have the results, I have a lot of information, but how do I sort through all that and make sense of it all? What is going to be most important to the business leaders that I'm working with? Or even when I have those results, I'm not sure exactly how to communicate those outcomes to the business leaders. So this is what I'd like to focus on today, and really would like to break this into 3 areas and focus on embracing a mindset of curiosity within HR, applying art and science to interpret the results that you would receive when you're doing your analysis, and finally crafting a compelling story for change. And again, see these as perhaps even whether they're barriers to overcome or enablers that you really need to be successful. I think it's critical that these are areas that you are more aware of that could stand in your way of a successful talent analytics strategy. So let's start with curiosity. Embracing a mindset of curiosity. I want you to think about what you did when you woke up today. So what did you want to know? Were you interested in what the weather was? Maybe not only today, but perhaps you have plans for the weekend, so you were looking ahead a little bit. Were you thinking about how can I get to a destination? What will be the fastest route? Perhaps you're traveling. You want to make sure that your train or your plane is arriving on time. Maybe it's even something else. Maybe you're planning a lunch or a dinner. Now you can even find out when stores and restaurants have peak times during the day. There's so much information that's at your fingertips. So I wouldn't be surprised if you did at least one of those today. Did you also find or seek information about what was driving attrition at your organization, or perhaps how that latest customer service training is impacting sales? Were you looking for whether or not you have equity within your performance and compensation? Were you looking at whether you're reducing risk in your training that people have to complete for compliance reasons? Or are you thinking about how you could identify potential employees for roles that you anticipate to be open in the next 6 months? Chances are this was not first on your list today, because we often think of talent data as not being easily accessible, as not being at our fingertips, and something that even if it was, that even if we have these types of tools, that we're going to have to do some work to kind of get the answers out of that data. And that often stops us in our tracks. So in some ways, this may seem relatively simple, but it's almost a fear of what will I do with that data? How will I interpret it? How will I share it? And is it accurate? So we become overwhelmed and frozen. But what I'm really encouraging you to do is instead to embrace the data. Much like you did for all those apps on your phone this morning, data should be at your fingertips. It should be driving your decisions. It should be part of your conversations about talent on a regular basis. It should be second nature to you. And although it may feel like it may take a while to get there, it is possible. And again, part of that, I think an underlying essential aspect to that is curiosity. What do I mean by curiosity? So, when you're curious about something, again, much like when you were thinking, gosh, what's the weather today? Or how can I get from point A to point B? You're asking a question. You're seeking information. And you're curious to know. You may or may not have to know, but you're curious to know how you can gather that information. And you have faith in the accuracy of the information. So this was just a fun study that I found where scientists at Berkeley, no less, and they were mechanical engineers, were curious about why shoelaces or how shoelaces come untied. So you might be thinking, well, who cares about that? But and maybe not a lot of people, but all of us have had our shoelaces untied. And I can tell you, especially if you have kids who are out on some sports field, soccer field, and you're trying to yell to them from the sidelines, tie your shoelaces before they trip over them. Someone somewhere is interested in this information. And someone was curious enough to actually do a whole study, even to take video, different shoes, different people, different activities, and to find out why this happens. The terms at the bottom are other alternative terms to curiosity, and I think they're important because curiosity really is about that desire to know, to seek information. You might even be a little bit intrusive in trying to find out an answer. Asking questions is not enough. It's much more than that. It's more desire and digging and seeking and trying to understand. And so what I'm curious for you all is whether what you're thinking about in your own organization. So what are you curious about when it comes to talent? So I would first polling questions. We're going to have 3 of these today. So this is the first of 3. I'd like you to think about in your organization, what do HR leaders want to use talent analytics for to investigate and understand? And there's 4 responses here. The first is, are you curious about how to improve the efficiency of your HR processes, or perhaps identify key talent indicators linked to business outcomes? Are you interested in trying to determine what the future talent challenges will be for your organization and how to plan for those? Do you want to develop a more deliberate HR strategy? Or perhaps there's some very specific current HR priorities, like how do we address attrition or improve recruiting or fill roles from a succession perspective that you're trying to answer. I'll give everyone a minute or so to respond to the poll, and then we'll look at the results. Great, results are coming in, and they're going to change a little bit as you all respond. So already we have a pretty high number of people saying that they're looking for answers to specific HR priorities. And they also are interested, you all are also interested in indicators that may link to business outcomes. We'll give you all a couple more seconds to respond, but all right. So again, the most of you said some specific things that you want to investigate and get answers for, and then B was business outcomes. So let's go actually to our next question. So the difference here is that I want you now to respond to the same type of, it's the same response items, or same answers 1 through 5, but the question is focused on what do your business leaders want to use talent analytics for. So again, put yourself in position of your business leaders and think about the specific folks that you interact with. And those could either be at the C-suite level, it could be, directors of operations, but people who you interact with. And if you went to them today and said, we're really beginning to embrace talent analytics, and there are some things that we feel like we're going to be able to provide some compelling information to you about, what would you be interested in? What would they say? Same thing, improving efficiency of HR, talent indicators that are linked to business outcomes, future talent challenges, developing a more deliberate HR strategy, or specific HR priorities. So again, I'll allow you to answer the second question. All right, so as your responses come in, so I might have primed the pump a little bit here for answer B, but not surprisingly, as you continue to respond, and feel free to continue to click if you'd like, but the majority of you said, yes, when I ask my business leaders what they want to know how those talent indicators are linked to their business outcomes. So we're having it go up a little bit, but still some response for HR in terms of HR priorities, because there might be some pain points for them there as well. Great. Well, thank you for your responses on that. So Holly, we can go back to the slides, because this actually was a real survey. I didn't give you all of these responses, but wanted to see sort of where we stood today versus this particular study, and this was with the Workforce Analytics Summit. But not surprisingly, and the question was not posed to them as to what business leaders would want, but just more or less, what do you want? What do you want if you're in HR or talent management or in the talent space? And not surprisingly, the majority of people said, yes, we are focused on HR and the efficiency of our HR processes. And a little bit further back, second and third, were key indicators for business outcomes or future challenges. And so this is our comfort zone. HR for HR is still the strongest driver and use of analytics. And so what I'm challenging you all to do is to sort of, again, say, okay, well, yeah, let's get out of our comfort zone a little bit. And what else do we want? What other questions do we want to answer? And really probably the first thing top of mind would be, we want to be able to answer those same questions that the business wants to know the answers to. I will share with you, though, I've had folks say, well, I've asked our business leaders what they want to know, and I don't really get a straight answer out of them. So this is where, again, curiosity, I feel like, comes into play, because asking them is fine, but probably a much more effective approach is for you to figure this out on your own. Again, be inquisitive, be a little bit meddling, as so we saw some of the definition of the curiosity. Have an eagerness to seek out that information. And to do that, you have to really get involved in the business, because it's often those times when you're sort of side by side with them, in their space, where you're listening to their words and listening to how they interact with other people, is where you're really going to be able to determine what their greatest challenges are, where their pain points are, where they see a need. And it's often in their language, not HR language. So I'll share with you, at my last company, we were doing strategic workforce planning, and we were about a month into the process, and our HR business partner, who was linked to that group, went on maternity leave. So we had another HR business partner come into the conversation, into the project, and we were in a session where we were working through some of the gap analysis for the workforce planning, and the HR business partner sort of jumped in and said, we've been talking for a couple hours now, and we haven't really talked about talent at all or HR issues at all. We're talking about business issues. And fortunately, by that time, our business partners said, because they had sort of gotten used to this, they said, these are our people issues. Our business issues are not issues or can't be resolved unless we, have the people in the right place and in the right time and with the right skills in order to accomplish this. So listen for and maybe translate a little bit back into, what it means from a talent perspective. But seek out that information, and you'll be able to start anticipating those questions and answers. But again, go into it with a mindset of curiosity. I also will encourage you internally in your own teams. This is not an exhaustive list of questions, but just a few to sort of, maybe spark some a conversation starter within your own teams. So ask your own teams, ask your peers, and yourselves, what don't you know today that you need to know to be a successful talent advisor to the business? What questions do you get from your clients that you don't have an answer to or solution for? And are there assumptions about the workforce that you have not really confirmed but are actually driving your priorities? The last one's probably the riskiest one, and I've certainly been down that path. So what if you knew fill in the blank, and what would that be? And that will certainly sort of get you out of the usual suspects of where you might be generating reports and dashboards today, and continue you down the path of really finding some compelling results to share with your business partners about your workforce and about talent. So switching now to sort of the second area where I feel tends to hold us back from an HR perspective is interpretation, and really balancing art and science when we have the results. So remember, for today, we're pretending that you have all the data that you need, you have the tools and technology, so you're running these analyses, and now you have the results. What do you do with them? There's so many great tools out there to use for talent analytics, but none of them are a magic bullet. It still requires interpretation once you have the results of your analysis. And interpretation is always in the eye of the beholder. And so one thing to keep in mind is that even though you are a talent expert, you really should be the first to take a stab at interpreting the results, but others are going to come to different conclusions because of different experience, history with the company. They may have different goals, so they're seeking certain answers, or have different biases that will create a lens through which they're looking at the results. So always important to take into account that your interpretation is, of course, not the only interpretation. But here's a couple things to think about as you're going through this process. First of all, the science. So again, the data is not always going to be perfect, but you probably have a great understanding of what has gone into the data set, where the flaws are, and you created certain assumptions before you did your analysis, such as what time frame are we looking at? Which divisions are we including? Is there certain data that we're leaving out of the analysis? There's certain pieces of data that again, could be skewing the results. So understanding the environment, the history, your own experience with the organization and with the workforce is important because it is driving the data. And obviously you made some decisions, or your analyst made some decisions about how to approach the data. So I would encourage you to even make note of those. Also, there's an art to interpretation, of course. As we just said, there are different explanations. There's certain biases that you come in with. So make sure that you challenge those conclusions. Share the results with others within your own team or trusted people outside of your team to say, are we looking at this the right way? What am I missing? You also want to make sure that you're asking yourself, and we'll talk about the audience in a second, but when I think about who this data is and results are going to, how can I anticipate how they might be looking at the data? And make sure that, one of the most common responses, especially if you're presenting something that's very compelling or different than the audience expects it to be, is you could get very sidetracked on things like they may say, well, this can't be true. There must be something wrong with the data. So make sure that you're prepared for that and be able to address any sort of distractors or resistance that you might have, and make sure that you're going to focus on, again, the results that you want to present. So you're at a point now where you have the opportunity to take those results, more the raw results, and present them in a meaningful way. And there are wonderful tools that are also available to you that allow you to visualize that data in new and creative and exciting ways that you can pick and choose what best represents the interpretation of the results. So here's our third polling question for you, because I'm curious about whether you all are using data visualization tools today or not. So if you are currently using a visualization tool application, please respond appropriately of yes, we're using these types of tools extensively to present talent data. Or yes, you have data visualization tools, but maybe just starting to use it, understanding how to use it. Maybe you don't have data viz tools, but are considering it, or you don't have them and not planning on it anytime soon, or perhaps you're wondering, what the heck is data visualization? So take a moment and respond so we can sort of see, again today, how you all, our audience, are embracing data visualization. All right. So I'm glad some people were honest and said, what is data visualization? And we probably could, you probably have a whole day or course on that. In fact, there are great resources that become more readily available around data visualization. So I encourage you to seek those out. And again, it's come a long way. But it looks like the majority of you have said, no, we don't use the tools now, but are considering using them. And so this is, and then probably the second highest response was you have them or just start using it. So that's great, because as you use those tools, like I said, it's not, it really is, it's a great example of bringing together science and art, because, and Holly, we can go back to the slides, because the science part of it is you can take those results and, do all kinds of neat things with them from a visualization perspective. But make sure that you're using, again, all of those filters and thoughts about what am I trying to communicate? What do we want to convey? And use that in making your decisions about how you're going to display the data. So here's just one example of, on the left would be if you just had raw data, not very exciting, and then you leave it up to the person who's looking at it to say, what does this tell me? Versus on the right, when you start really leveraging data visualization tools, you're able to essentially start embedding your message, embedding your interpretation in the visual picture as well. And it's very appealing to the person who you're presenting this to, because it allows them to sort of receive the information in sort of new and exciting types of ways. So not is it, again, usually help to reach a conclusion a little bit faster, but the other great thing about visualization is it encourages engagement with the results. So again, you want your audience to look at the results in meaningful ways, and pictures and colors and different ways of displaying that interactive movement of your results helps them to do that. Again, I still encourage you to sort of control that process, because you do want to guide them in how the information should be interpreted. But these types of tools allow you to sort of craft your message. And when art and science come together, you are able to paint this bigger picture that really has meaning. The data visualization tools also really encourage more dialogue and interaction, which of course is what you really want when you're talking about more complex analytics that are going to drive essentially decisions and action going forward. So, and that brings us to telling your story. So crafting a compelling story for change is, think of it as, you're running this marathon, and you're at the last mile. And what you don't want to happen is that you're doing all this great analysis, you're asking the right questions, you are interpreting the results in meaningful ways that make sense from a business perspective, and now you have to share that and use it to, again, drive change, inform decisions, make investments, and so forth. And so this also, I really feel like, is a key area that probably people don't put enough focus on, and you can come up short at the very end of your marathon, and you want to do that. So again, storytelling is one of those areas where you again could take an entire course on this, or we could talk about it for an entire day. So I'm really just scratching the surface here, and hopefully planting the seed with you to want to learn more about it. And hope, again, leave you with a few things that you can think about and do right away. So, of course, first and foremost, as in any type of information that you're sharing, you want to know your audience, but also know your goal. So who are you talking to? And I literally mean who's going to be the recipient of your information. Know what their background is, their interests, their goals. What is it that they're going to want to know from you, and why should they care? Why is it important? Think about those three questions and then start crafting your story. But also, before you craft your story, what is it that you're really trying to achieve? Do you want your audience to simply believe something, new information or a new concept, or perhaps what you're going to share with them is so different than what they may already know that first you have to get them to believe in it before you can move on? Or perhaps they already believe in the importance or sort of foundationally what you're sharing, and you're trying to move them towards a decision and ultimately to take action. So I'll share with you a quick story. At one organization I was with, we had a senior executive who very publicly was sharing in many different venues that for our management trainees that we were experiencing a 50% attrition rate. at the time, I was leading talent acquisition and talent management, so that information got back to me very, very quickly. And of course, he was calling for action, of course, to do something about this, particularly as it related to training and hiring of our management in our management trainee program. The reality was, as far as I knew, our attrition rate was not 50%, it was 15%. So, of course, we had some work to do to figure out where he was getting his number and why. And then, of course, just coming to him and saying, oh, no, it's really not 50, it's 15, was not going to be the best approach. So it was important for me. I knew the very first step was to get him to believe that that perhaps there was a different reality, that there was something else going on. And I had to, of course, understand where he was coming from. And not only did he believe it, but of course, because he was in his position, others were starting to believe it as well. So the first thing I knew I had to accomplish was to change the belief, which quite honestly wasn't an easy task, and was not, it was a one-on-one conversation, because I knew that it would be a difficult conversation. I knew I had the data to back it up, but that was not what I brought to the table. It was a conversation and about, where, what was going on and what his concerns were. And it was a successful conversation. So after that, though, it was a matter of saying, well, what are our real issues here with the management trainee population? And it opened up a whole other dialogue around how to improve that program and the success of those in it. And finally, in a much broader audience, including the managers of those trainees, what action would we have to take? So just a quick example of how, it can be a multi-step process, and probably is a multi-audience process. So your story is not necessarily happens one time, but I do encourage you to have the same story throughout all those different experiences. This is what you should not do when you're telling your story, which is come in with the data in hand or up on the screen or on your computer or whatever you may do. This will immediately shut down the conversation, or of course leaves it to them to interpret your results rather than you being the expert and being the strategic advisor in that conversation. Your story might not look like this either, so it might not be, dark and gloomy and we have to act fast and everyone's on the edge of their seat, because chances are this is probably the environment you're telling your story in, but it may not be the only one. So again, it might be in passing in the hallway, over lunch, on the factory floor, or again, one-on-one, in that manager's office. So your story should be simple and direct, and it should sort of be able to adapt to all of those situations. So what's in a story? A story, and we are using the letters STORY to make it easy to remember, but includes your setup, your trigger, your obstacle, your resolution, and your takeaway. And I'll give you, again, I'll use the management trainee example to sort of walk you through what this might look like. So the setup. This is, what's the background? So as I mentioned, we had management trainees, and the management trainees were, we felt like we were hiring the best folks into our management trainee program. They got intensive onboarding and training their first year, exposure and visibility throughout the organization. And then at the end of their first year, they were placed. They were placed in their spot, in their box, perhaps. And that was what, the whole first year was intended to do, is where will this person be a best fit for in our organization? And back to the attrition piece, what we found is actually in the first year, we didn't have very much attrition. It was about 5%. But what we did see is that after they were placed in their roles, we did see attrition go up. And it went up about 10% that second year, then started to trail off again. So in the first 2 years, it was a total of 15% attrition. So what was happening? What did we think was happening? Well, when we hired these people, we only hired rock stars, and we told them they were rock stars, and we treated them like rock stars during the program. And so when they got into their position that they'd been really prepared and groomed for, they started to tell us we didn't feel like rock stars anymore. Some of them struggled with that second year, or really their first year in their placement job with performing. So they weren't really confident in themselves. And also some of them felt like, they had been really supported and sort of, shepherded through the first year, but now they were out on their own. And so there was a point in time where some of them questioned about whether or not they would succeed. They also, of course, were thinking about what are my opportunities for the future, and how am I going to get there, and who is going to help me to get there? How can I figure this out? So they weren't necessarily looking right away, but they were thinking about their future, and they did not have a lot of information about their opportunities. What they really wanted was visibility and clear path, maybe not necessarily always a promotion, but where else can I move within the organization to be successful? What can I get involved in to gain experience and knowledge and skills? And they just wanted to be able to know where those opportunities were. So the takeaway was to our executives was, if you want your best employees to be around in the future, you need to give them one. Now, throughout that story, there was a lot of data to support all the things that I shared, but I rarely brought it into the presentation because now, once I would get to the end and sort of had their attention, the managers were ready to say, absolutely. Well, what do we do next? We don't want to lose these folks that we've invested in. In fact, it's probably not just the trainees. It's probably other employees who want this same thing. So what do we do? What do we do next? And that's exactly where you want them to be. And then further questions or further action, you can always back up through your data as well. So let data be your guide, but let your story really draw people into why this is important. The last thing I'll leave you with is also think about who your storytellers are. You may not be the only one to tell the story. You may have other people with you, either people from HR close to the business. Maybe it is your data expert or your analyst. And so the important thing is, yes, you can each come to the table with sort of a different perspective, but you do want to have essentially the same story. And you also want to be able to eventually have your business partners be able to even tell the story themselves, because that's where you really know that you're influencing change and influencing business outcomes when they adopt it as their own. And it's no longer an HR initiative or an HR idea even. It's really their idea because it becomes their story. So just some takeaways from today. Embrace a mindset of curiosity and make sure that you're listening and understanding your business leaders. Become closer to the heart of your business. Don't think you always need to know all the answers, and really be inquisitive about what their challenges are. Apply science and art to interpret the results. You're going to start with the science, but you have the expertise to really add your own perspective to it and make sure you're the one that is taking the first stab at that interpretation and bring others into it as well. And then always remember that they're looking at it through a different lens than you are. And then craft your story. Start with the goal in mind. Do you want them to believe, decide, take action, or something else? Use the data to support your story and make sure that you bring in different perspectives and different storytellers. So I think we still have a little bit of time for questions.
You're right about that, Jennifer. We do have a few questions that came in over the course of the webcast, and so we'll get to those in the time that we have remaining. And we will give one more thank you to you, as well as everyone at Cornerstone On Demand today for the webcast. We, of course, couldn't do it without you. And so our first question comes in by someone named Aranka, or Arancha. I hope that I'm pronouncing that right. And Aranka wants to know, could you put examples of data visualization tools in the market?
Yeah, there are actually a lot of options out there, and some are, for example, like at Cornerstone, we have some visualization tools that are embedded into our talent management systems. But there are others that are more standalone or that can sort of sit on top of, and integrate with your other systems. Visier is one of them, but there are a lot of others that provide great options for you. So I just encourage you to do a little bit of research, but what's important, if it's not something that sort of comes with your HR or talent management systems, just ask lots of questions about the interface with your data, and make sure that you're able to do what you want to do. Often, the advantage of those tools is that you're able to pull together lots of disparate information, disparate data into one place, so that you can start looking at the connections and correlations across different data sets. So it's a great first step if you're not quite ready for more advanced analytics and predictive analytics. And it just from our polling question, it looks like, a lot of folks are just sort of starting down the path of data visualization. It's a great place to start because, as I said, it really helps you sort of interact with the data in a new kind of way and begin the dialogue around, what do we know and what do we want to find out next.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. We have another question coming in from Pamela, and she asks, if the fundamentals are not in place, how do you recommend getting started?
Oh, yeah, great question. I knew, I was taking, it's a little bit of a risk to assume that, but I think we get so focused on the data, but it is, a significant barrier. What I share with people is, it may sound kind of like simple, but start somewhere. And what you'll find is, if you are focused on a business issue, so that your talent data is going to be able to answer a business-related question, then you may find that you do have the data, because a lot of it is already going to be part of your HR tools. So start somewhere, and if you need additional data, let's say that resides somewhere else, then again, it might just be certain data points that when you work with someone in that department, let's say sales or finance, they can partner with you to do that. But most of the time, when you start out, again, don't become overwhelmed with trying to answer 20 different questions. Start with one. You'll probably find that the data that you need to do that analysis is within your control. And it's what I found is it, again, also when I say start somewhere, I've also seen people who just want to clean up their data and don't want to run any analysis until they feel like it's perfect. It makes sense to some degree, but you can also correct for some of the problems with your data, either during the analysis or during your interpretation of the results. So again, it's not always going to be perfect, and don't let that stop you either. So find a starting point, and once you start creating some interesting results, what I think you'll find is that there'll be more demand for that information. And often with demand, especially from business partners, comes the opportunity for resources and investments who can help you sort of obtain or clean the rest of the data to do new and different things. So start somewhere.
I think that's really good advice. Just get started. Sometimes that can be the hardest part. So we'll take another question. This comes in from someone who did not give their full name, but they want to know, are there any examples of companies that are advancing the use of HR analytics, and could you name some?
There are. I mean, there are, I probably won't want to name a list of them, but I do know that in the recent Burson report that came out earlier this year on sort of on this, the state of where we are in analytics, there are several examples in there. So I'd sort of point you towards that Burson by Deloitte report that talks about how companies are linking talent data to business outcomes, again, such as sales, customer service, productivity numbers, and so forth. There, are also, I would say it's not necessary, but again, as I mentioned sort of at the beginning of the webcast, you do tend to find companies that have embraced analytics in other areas. Let's say in Amazon or Bank of America or, large organizations that already, have pretty sophisticated analytics tools and resources that they're using for really to drive the business. They're more early adopters of using talent analytics as well. But I don't want that to discourage, really all sizes and types of companies can benefit from talent analytics.
All right, thank you. And we'll take another question. This one comes in from Brittany. And she says, we are interested in building a team to run talent analytics. What type of experts should they look for to form this team?
Yeah, I didn't focus on this too much, but it is, again, often I think can be a barrier. I've heard people say, well, I'll start our talent analytics when I'm able to hire that data scientist for my team. And again, I think it goes back to, again, my point earlier of it's almost like a fear of doing some things on your own, or again, not waiting for expertise to be actually sitting on your team. So, but with that aside, certainly people who have so a data scientist who is, or a statistician, someone who has the ability to run, especially when you're ready for more predictive analytics, who has the ability to run those more sophisticated models, understands, different tools and systems and applications for that type of analysis is very helpful. Also someone who knows the data inside and out. Again, to the earlier question about, hey, I don't know if my data is clean or has good integrity or even how to access it. People who can just simply structure the data and who are have that knowledge of where data resides in your company are very invaluable. Also, I've seen many companies make sure that they include like a behavioral scientist, an IO psychologist, or someone like that who is very beneficial in helping to interpret results and take the results and drive towards action. What I'll say about all of those, though, is that it doesn't necessarily, you don't necessarily have to put together an internal team to do that. So get creative, look in other parts of your organization. Chances are you have those skill sets, let's say over in finance or marketing or other areas that you can borrow or partner with. And then also consider that you may, in the short term, have a partner, an external partner who you can leverage as well. And then that really builds your case internally as to whether or not you need to actually have those folks inside your team. But as your analytics matures, most likely you will. But again, you can, I think, get creative the front end of where you find those resources. But those would be the three that I would focus on: data structuring, data scientists, statisticians, and behavioral scientists are very valuable.
All right. Thank you so much for breaking those down, Jennifer. And so we'll go ahead and wrap up our material for today. And everyone, please feel free to continue this discussion on social media. And to all of our HCI members, thank you once more for spending a little bit of your time with us today. And we do hope to see everyone participate in another HCI learning opportunity. Have a great day, everyone.